Yanis, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're excited about it. I have a lot of questions. So why don't we dive in? So I want to obviously talk most about things that are going on today. And there are plenty of wars and conflicts and economic issues that merit a great deal of attention. So I want to spend the bulk on that. But before I get to that, I actually want to talk about, just briefly, the time in 2015 when you served as Greece's finance minister. And I think that was when your work became known to huge audiences around the world. So I think that was when I first became aware of your work. And it was just so interesting for those who don't know, because Greece was facing this debt crisis, the EU and the World Bank and the European Bank were squeezing Greece, trying to force you into these austerity measures that you had been elected to resist. And it kind of went into this major conflict. You won a referendum in your country where you convinced people to reject the EU deal, but the leadership of your party and of Greece ended up ultimately, as you called it, surrendering, and then you resigned. And that's a very, broad summary. Feel free to add whatever you want to that. But what I'm interested in knowing is, what did you walk away from having learned from that? Like, how does that experience shape your views today of neoliberalism or the EU or just political conflicts in general?
Well, a couple of parts to this answer, I think, might help our audience. The first one concerns the causes of the crisis that you described, and to connect with a mainly United States-based audience, it is important for you folks to realize that what happened here in Greece was the direct repercussion of the collapse of Wall Street in 2008. Because the collapse of Wall Street precipitated, just like in 1929, the absolute deep bankruptcy of every single bank in Germany and in France. You only need to state this in order to realize the enormity of this. And it was panic stations. Governments didn't understand why they collapsed. They had no idea where to find the money to save them, to bail them out. Because unlike the United States, where you had the Federal Reserve that could go in cahoots with the federal government and immediately print the money that was necessary through TARP, through various other means, quantitative easing, the Europeans had this rule that we do not save either the banks of a nation state or the government of a nation state. So they had to find ways of violating the rules while pretending that they are respecting them. So you can imagine the shit show that was, excuse my not particularly scientific term. And then they started, they were just like silly cats chasing their own tail. And they were borrowing from the weakest of the citizenry around Europe in order effectively to bail out the banks. They couldn't even print money at the beginning. So Greece, being the most fragile and economically challenged part of this bloc called the Eurozone, we collapsed first. But it was the first domino of a domino effect. By the time I got into government 5 years later, in 2015, I only had one task, one objective. That was the mandate that I had received from the Greek people, to resist being forced to take yet another credit card from the powers that be, from international financiers, from the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, the European Commission, so on, from which to draw money at high interest rates in order to pretend to be repaying the German and the French banks. Because not only were they insisting that I should take a credit card on behalf of our suffering people, but that the conditions for giving me these credit cards was even harsher austerity that would crash whatever incomes there were left. So anyway, this is history, but it's not just history. Because, Glenn, allow me to say something that I think will connect with our audience today, directly connect. I remember one of my debates, deliberations, clashes with the German finance minister, a certain gentleman going by the name of Wolfgang Schäuble. He has passed on now. Very important and smart and powerful man in the European Union at the time. He was pushing the line that only through belt-tightening, austerity, can we essentially become self-sufficient again, we Greeks. And what he had in mind about self-sufficiency was that we would become net exporters. And through the net exports, be able to pay back our debts. And this is a German model. And when I said to him, Wolfgang, you realize that if we all do that, if we all become net exporters like Germany's, if we all become Germany's, then it is the United States that will have to take on all the net exports that we are exporting, because the Chinese are net exporters, the Japanese are net exporters. If we all become in Europe net exporters, who on earth is going to be a net importer? The United States, which of course was a net importer. But effectively what Europe did between the great financial collapse of 2008 and today is they created, to some extent, with the help of Obama, I have to say, Donald Trump. Because when Donald Trump says that, folks, you Europeans, you have $240 billion of a trade surplus with the United States, and that can't continue. Well, he's a madman. He's a very poor excuse for human nature. I consider him to be a proto-fascist, a quasi-fascist. But on this, he's right. And this is exactly what Europe did in order to overcome the bankruptcy of its banks after Wall Street collapsed in 2008. Essentially pushed all our countries through austerity, harsh austerity, through mind-numbing levels of poverty, to tighten our belt so much, to stop consuming locally, so that we all become net exporters. And you see, the chickens are coming home to roost now, because you have that madman in the White House who correctly points out that Europe has been a freeloader on this. Now, of course, what he's proposing instead is utterly mad and bad. But this is the problem that Europe has. Europe is not this democratic, civilized, rational place that has just been assaulted by the madman with the orange hair. Europe is at fault. We have treated our own peoples abysmally through this combination of harsh austerity for the many across Europe, not just in Greece, in Germany as well. Low levels of investment and net exports to the rest of the world. So there you go.
I want to get to the Trump tariff plan in a minute and the whole scheme that he's trying to implement, what those goals are. But just staying on Europe for a second, I do think, certainly rhetorically, and maybe in an enduring and sustained way, European leaders are thinking about the world differently, in part because of Trump's obvious desire to abandon Ukraine, kind of force a peace deal on them, and leaving Europe to think, oh, wow, we can't rely on the U.S. anymore. We better go do that. Even talks about forcing the Europeans to take on more of their own defense responsibility, and these huge budgets that are now coming for vastly increased spending on the military in the name of, I don't know, saving Ukraine or making the EU into some sort of independent military power, no longer needing to rely on the U.S. If that were to take place, if this defense spending increases, these significant defense spending increases that we're being told to expect or that are even coming, actually has started to happen, and the EU really starts rearming and building its military in a very meaningful way, as it says it believes it has to do, what effect would that have on this kind of already tattered social fabric in the EU, where people feel besieged? They have very similar sentiments to what's taking place throughout the democratic world. They feel like these distant establishment institutions don't care about them at all. Will that exacerbate it, or what will be the implications of all that?
Glenn, the dominant paradigm, the dominant narrative in Europe is that, well, we can't any longer sell our cars because they're not competitive in relation to BYD, the Chinese ones, or Tesla. So we might as well convert Volkswagen's production lines into production lines producing cars for Rheinmetall. And we will grow through this kind of rearmament project, or allow me to put it a bit slightly more pseudoscientifically, military Keynesianism. That's a dominant paradigm. It is dangerously erroneous. It is such a myth. It is such a toxic lie that is being sold to Europeans. And allow me to say this. Military Keynesianism does work. It can work. It worked under Hitler. Within 2 years, Hitler eliminated unemployment. Germany grew. But of course, the result was the Second World War, because ammunition, once you start basing your whole growth strategy on producing more ammunition, at some point your warehouses will be full. So you will need to restock. You will need to get rid of it in order to restock. So you need a war. In the United States, military Keynesianism has worked since the late 1930s. It's the reason. On the one hand, yes, of course, there was FDR's New Deal, but if it wasn't for the Second World War, the American economy would not have recovered to the extent that it did, and it would not have become so dominant during the Bretton Woods era. So military Keynesianism work, but this is why the United States needs to conduct a war every 1, 2, 3 years, and sometimes every year. And that's why we had Korea, that's why we had Vietnam, that's why we had Iraq, that's why we had Afghanistan, because the stock needs to be replenished for military Keynesianism to work. Now, is Europe proposing to start its own sequence of wars in order to keep the military Keynesian multiplier accelerator growth model going? Firstly, it will be catastrophic ethically and from the perspective of the human species to do this. Secondly, they can't do it. They really can't do it. Because in order to start a war, you need to have somebody who can make the decision to start the war. Now, in the United States, you have the American president. You have Congress. Who in Europe can decide, even if we created, let's say we created a massive European army, who's going to decide whether they should go to war or not tomorrow? Who will send these men and women to the battlefield? I hope that never happens, but if it happens, who is going to decide that? The European Commission President, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, doesn't even have a democratic mandate in her own neighborhood, let
Thank
alone
God.
across Europe.
She would like to do it. She would like to do it, but
Zero democratic legitimacy. It's not even in her job description. Once upon a time, we had Angela Merkel, who was the de facto leader of Europe, because Germany still had a massive surplus that was sustainable to the extent that everybody else was practicing austerity. Now they can't even elect. The Pope was elected more speedily than the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. France has a lame duck president. France is a deficit country anyway. When I was in government, there was a north-south divide in Europe. Now there is also an east-west divide. So what I'm saying, briefly, it can't work. It won't work. Europe will stagnate faster because they are borrowing as we speak. You know, there is a directive that's coming to our capitals from Brussels saying shift resources, funding from social programs to military spending. Now, this is in a Europe where the majority have been treated like cattle that lost their market value long ago. And this is why they are turning towards the ultra-right, just like in the mid-war period, to reduce social spending in order to buy tanks that we neither need nor want, while increasing the indebtedness of our already fiscally stressed countries, to do so without any multiplier accelerator developmental growth machine happening in the medium term. This is simply digging the hole in which we find ourselves deeper instead of stopping digging.
If your dog is constantly itching, scratching, or dealing with hot spots, you've got to check out Coat Defense. It's an all-natural solution that's been helping so many dogs. And I say that, as you probably know, we have roughly 25 dogs at home. We have a shelter with another 150 or 200, and they often have these itching and skin problems. And there hasn't really been a solution for a long time. Here's why this caught my attention. I've seen it firsthand, how often dogs develop things like yeast infections, especially in their paws, ears, and skin folds. It's a lot more common than people realize, but the usual treatments like steroids or antibiotics or Apoquel or Cytopoint, they might cover up the symptom for a while, but they don't actually fix the root cause. And in some cases, they actually make things way worse over time. Coat Defense is different. Their daily preventative power works as a dry shampoo, odor eliminator, and anti-itch powder. But what makes it special is that it eliminates yeast naturally by changing the terrain on your dog's skin so that yeast and bacteria can't survive. No toxic chemicals, no synthetic junk, just safe, natural ingredients. They also make an aloe-based sensitive skin shampoo that calms irritated skin, preserves the natural oils and microbiome, and is totally free of parabens and sulfates and anything artificial. And honestly, I've been really surprised reading the testimonials and seeing their products firsthand. I've heard from so many people that this is the only thing that has finally worked after years of frustration that has made dogs finally itch-free and healthy again. And that's why I'm happy to partner with Coat Defense. So if your dog has been struggling and nothing else has helped, go to coatdefense.com and use the promo code GLENN for 15% off of your first order. That's coatdefense.com, code GLENN. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.